everybody, welcome back to Iver Environment Centre. It's a little bit windy today, and so I'm inside the centre so you can actually hear what I'm saying. Today we're going to be looking at flowers. We're going to be finding out all about flowers, what they do, but first I want to show you a couple of things that I've been sent, and I just want to say a big thank you again to everyone who's joining in, who's watching, who's trying things out at home. I loved hearing the stories about all the different people who tried training snails. Glad it worked for so many of you. That's absolutely brilliant. We've also wanted to show you this picture of a woodlouse choice chamber. So Maddie made this, and as you can see, if you go in nice and close, all of the woodlice have chosen to be on the damp dark side of the choice chamber. So fantastic, well done to Maddie for her woodlouse choice chamber. I also want to show you this. Now this was inspired by Susanna's mini session on collecting. And Thomas and his brother have collected a number of different things, and after watching the video they started organising it and sorting it, and they wrote labels for it. Now these, as you can see, are the eggshells that they found, and if you look closely you'll notice that all of them are broken. Now that's a good thing, because in this country, like it should be everywhere, it's illegal to go into a bird's nest and steal the eggs with the babies inside. So don't do that. And Thomas has not done that. What he did is he waited until the eggs had hatched out. And when a bird's egg hatches out, the birds, the parent birds, eventually they clean their nest and they throw out all those bits of eggshell. So when he was walking around, Thomas didn't look up in nests for these treasures. He looked on the floor and he found these eggshells that had been taken out of the eggs and just thrown away by the parents. And that's where he found these wonderful things. So this week we're going to be looking at flowers. So if you can think back to our very first session on parts of the plant, what did we say the role of the flower was? How does it help the plant? That's right. The flower's job is to be attractive. So it wants to smell good and it wants to look good so that it can attract the pollinators. Hang on. What are pollinators? What's pollination? These are really important words to do with flowers, and so in order to find out what they mean, we need to look closely at a flower. We need to find out what different parts make up a flower and how they work. So this is a basic picture of the flower. As you all know, we have the stalk. We have a bit called the receptacle, which holds the flower, and then we have these bits, which are called sepals, or some people call them sepals, and they, when the flower is a little bud, they close around them, protecting them. When the flower opens up, they sit underneath, holding up the flower. Bet you all can tell me what these are called. That's right. They're the petals. And inside the petals is where you get to the interesting bits. Now every flower has a male part and a female part inside them, apart from a few plants which have separate male and female flowers, but most of them are like this one. And so the female bit, there's only one of, and it's generally in the middle. We call it all together, we call it the pistil, and it's made up of a sticky stigma at the top, a style, that bit going down there, and the ovary And inside the ovary are lots of little ovules. Okay, each holding an egg. So that's the female bit. We then have the male part, which altogether is called the stamen. And the stamen is made of two parts. The filament, which is a long stalky type thing that holds up the anther. That's the bit at the tip that has all the pollen on it. So here we're showing the pollen with yellow dots. Oh, what's this anther missing? Well done, the filament. There we go. And this is what flowers should look for. It should look like, with the female part and the male parts. Shall we do a dissection now? Shall we open up some flowers and see whether we can find all these different parts? So let's see whether we can find all those parts of the plant in our flowers. So I'm going to start with this big one here. And the first thing I'm going to do is remove a couple of the, bits have come off with it. Can you see? I'm going to move a couple of the petals so that we can see what's inside a bit better. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick some things onto my piece of paper. I've got some double-sided sticky tape and I'm just going to pop them onto that so that I've got a record of all the different bits. So I'm going to put one of my petals on and one of each bit I find. Now obviously you don't need to do this. You can, if you've got double-sided sticky tape at home, you can, or you can just glue it to a piece of paper to keep your record. So I've managed to open it up. I've taken the leaves off and the first thing I found is this. What's this, everybody? Quite right, it's the male part of the plant, the stamen, with the long filament and the anther at the top. I wonder if there's any pollen on it. You know what? I think we'd see this better under the microscope. There you go. There's the filament, white, and the yellow anther. There's not a huge amount of pollen on this one because it's been out for quite a while and it's been quite windy the last few days. So we've found the petals and we found the stamen, the main part. So now let's look a bit more closely at the female part. We've got the sticky stigma at the top, which comes down into an ovary, which to be honest looks quite big already. Let's have a closer look at this. So let's have a bit of a closer look at that stigma. So yeah, you can see it's quite shiny, a little bit sticky. It's got some hairs on it so that it can trap the pollen. Now let's see what happens when we look inside that ovary. So can you see all those little tiny bits? Let's see if I can focus it a little better. No, not really. So let's have a closer look where I've opened it up. You can see each of those ovules, can't you? And in fact, I wonder if I could take any of them out. So you can see the ovules in the ovary all lined up. Now the question is, it was easy to find the different parts on this great big tulip, but I wonder if I can find the different parts on this flower. So first of all I need to peel away some of the petals so that we can actually see into the middle. Let's open it up a bit. Oh, lovely. Oh, this is great. Let's try and... yeah. So, round the edge, you can see the tiny... I've torn a bit of them off, a few of them off by accident. But you can see all the male parts. And then there's one female part in the middle. Let's see if I can get that bit separate. Let's take off these male parts and stick them onto my piece of paper. Take any remaining petals. Let's get these out of the way. And we've got, so the male parts are just there. Let's see if I can focus a bit more on that. You can just see the filament and the anther at the top, but we're now interested in this bit. And you can see the stigma at the top and those bits there. Let's have a closer look at this, eh? So this is something that's far more fun to do than to watch. So I definitely would encourage you to do the challenge for today and to try use a magnifying glass, maybe a camera on your phone if you can download a microscope, or look closely using your camera, or just use your eyes. Get a nice big plant like a daffodil from the shops. Right, I'm going to try open this one up again. Let's see what happens if I cut it open. Ooh, looks like this one doesn't have just one, but has several. Oh, black again. Right, so I haven't cut this one quite so well, but if you look at how I've opened it up, again, you can see I got into the ovary and found the ovules. So they're very tiny indeed, and they're in there. I opened up the ovary and found it, and there was actually a few different ovaries in this one. And if you have a look, you'll see quite how tiny the ovules are. So the pollen has to get from here on the anther to here on the stigma of a different flower in order to go in to the ovary and help make a new seed. But how does it do that? Well, in the past they had different ways, and I'll tell you more about that in our mini session on the evolution of plants. But pollination really took off when plants started using animals to pollinate them. Let's go meet one of these animals that can pollinate flowers. Hello, bee.
Hello.
Do you like the look of that flower?
Yes, I do.
Why would a bee like you want to visit a flower?
Because the nectar makes the honey, and the honey we use to feed ourselves and the baby bees.
Excellent. Now the very baby bees, you actually feed on pollen that you pick up from the anthers, which are these bits here, and you put in little leg pouches to carry back to the hive. But all the adults, you're quite right, they eat the honey. And sometimes us humans eat the honey too. So do you want to go into that flower and see if you can find any nectar? So she's gone right into the flower to get the nectar that's kept right in the middle. And while she does that, she's rubbing against these anthers. Can you see how she's rubbing against the anthers. And the anthers have the pollen on the end. And the pollen is falling off the anthers. Out you come, bee. Now, can you see how this bee, you might want to stand up, is now covered in pollen? Let's have a look. Lots and lots of pollen from the anthers all over the bee. Now, the bee is going to fly around. Buzz, and she's going to try and find another flower. Now go into that flower and see if you can find any nectar in the middle of that flower. Excellent. Out you come. So you can see as she went back in, some of the pollen that was on her has fallen off into the flower. And some of it has fallen on the petals, but some of it has fallen onto the sticky stigma. So what happens next? So what happens once the pollen has landed on the sticky stigma? It then creates what we call a pollen tube, and it travels down the style in the pollen tube all the way down to the ovary, where it meets one of the eggs or ova in the ovule. These then join together and start to make a seed. So usually a bee will come in to get the nectar past the anthers and get covered in pollen. But sometimes bees are a bit sneaky. Sometimes bees make what's called a robber hole, and then they go in and they get the nectar that way without going past the anthers, without getting any pollen stuck on them at all. So a flower's job is to be attractive to pollinators, to make sure that the pollen gets moved and those seeds get made. But attractiveness means different things to different animals. The smell makes a difference. If a flower smells nice, generally it's pollinated by bees. If it smells a bit stinky, usually it's the flies. Oh, lovely. So the colour of a flower will also make it more attractive. But different animals see the world very differently to us. We, us humans, are trichromatic, which means we've got three colour receptors in our eyes. One that sees green, one that sees blue, and one that sees red. And where those overlap, you can see that together those colours make up white light, which includes all the visible range. Now, if you've got a pet dog, they're definitely not seeing colours in the same way as you because they're not trichromatic. However, we're not interested in dogs. We're interested in bees because they're fab pollinators. So bees have two receptors on visible light, the blue and the green. However, they also have an extra receptor that shows them UV light. Now, us humans cannot see UV. It's beyond the power of our eyes. But with this torch, this UV torch, we should be able to. Can you see how with this UV light, you can see I've written a message in UV. Without the light, you can't see the message at all. Only when we shine the UV light on it. And plants use the fact that a lot of insects can see UV by having secret messages. So as we look at this flower, you'll notice that it's not yellow all over. It's got these stripes. Now these stripes are messages to pollinators. They catch their attention and they lead them all the way into the centre of the flower to where the nectar is, straight past this anther full of covered in pollen. We call them nectar guides. They're pretty clever, but us humans don't know quite how clever they are because we can't see ultraviolet light. See, when I shine this torch on here, you can see that those nectar guides really glow. They really stand out to the pollinators, taking them exactly where the flower wants them to go. There are all sorts of messages like this, these ultraviolet nectar guides that us humans just can't see because we look at colours in a different way to bees and other pollinators. Butterflies are also pollinators, and they see light in very different ways, not just to us but to each other. So something like a painted lady would see it much like bees would, with the two colour receptors that us humans have and the UV. Whereas other butterflies can have up to about 15 different receptors, and they can even see red, which is a colour that not many insects can. All insects see yellow really well. Bees see blues and purples very well. But no insect can really see red quite as well as things like birds can. Some plants even change the colour of their flowers to talk to the insects. So for example, this horse chestnut flower, tree, when it first flowers, all of the flowers will be yellow like this. But if you look at it now, you'll notice that most of them are pink. And that's because they've actually changed colour from yellow to pink. Why would they do that? Well, when they first open the flowers, they've got lots of pollen. They want to be pollinated. They want to get those insects coming. And so they'll be yellow, which, as we know, is a colour that insects see really well. After a while, you can pretty much guarantee that they've already been visited by an insect. So they don't want to keep on attracting them to their flower when there's a new flower just over there that still needs to be pollinated. So they change their colour from the nice noticeable yellow to the not very enticing, not very attractive pink. And the insects will ignore the pink flowers and head straight to the yellow ones, which are freshly opened and haven't been visited by insects yet. Why don't you see if you can find a horse chestnut tree with flowers like this? Maybe look on the ground underneath and see how many of them are pink and how many of them are yellow. Most of them will have turned pink by now, but if you're lucky enough to have an Indian horse chestnut in a park near you, those flower a little bit later. Also see colours at a different speed to us. So for example, if I were to go like this, you probably wouldn't be able to see all the individual flowers, however a bee would. And this helps them when they're flying along to be able to see all the different flowers that they want to visit. They also notice something called iridescence, which is a bit like when you look at a CD. So the surface of a CD is covered in lots of different bumps, which makes the kind of rainbowy colour that you can see when you look at it. Now, petals can also use structural colour like that. They can have hairs or ridges that create iridescence in the same way. And bees are really good at picking up that structural colour, and it will attract them to a certain part of the flower. And then when a honeybee does find lots of brilliant flowers full of lots of nectar, it goes back to the hive and it tells all the other bees. And it does that through dancing. He will go in and do what we call a waggle dance, where he wiggles his abdomen to tell them where the nectar flowers are. So the length, so the duration, how long he wiggles his abdomen for, wiggles his bottom, tells you how far away it is. If it's close, he gives a short wiggle. If it's far away, he gives a really long wiggle. And then the direction that he wiggles in tells you where the flower is in relation to the hive. We've got some hives here at Iver Environmental Centre. Would you like to have a look? This is where we keep our hives here at Iver Environment Centre. We've got some beekeepers who come in, who own the hives, who come in and look after them. And we've got a little bit of screening so that people can look at the hives. We wouldn't go through this gate into the bee garden unless we were kitted up and covered completely, even our face. And we probably would take something called a smoker with us. And that would just release a scent that would calm the bees down, just in case they were likely to get a bit grumpy. Though honeybees tend not to be grumpy ones. Now, if you look over here, you can see a few of the bees buzzing around near their hives. We've got one hive there, one in the back, one here, a couple of more traditional looking wooden ones there. And if we go over here, you can see we've got a couple more hidden at the very back. We don't normally have this many hives here, but at the moment it's just a lot easier to have them here in one place. And we've got lots and lots of flowers for them to enjoy, both inside the bee enclosure and all over the Environment Centre. Because of course, there's no top to the enclosure. The bees are allowed to fly wherever they want. Okay guys, it's quiz time. If you can write down the numbers 1 to 3 on the side on your piece of paper, I'm going to show you some flowers, and I'd like you to see if you can work out what might be the pollinators for those flowers. Okay, time for number 1. Number 1, what pollinator do you think pollinates these flowers? Okay, and for number 3, we have this. This is thyme, which is a very strong smelling herb, but the flowers actually open at night time. It's one of those night flowering plants, as is ivy, which seems to be a bit mixed up with it here. So what do you think pollinates these plants? That's right. It's sort of a bluey purpley colour, so we can assume that this is pollinated by bees. See, if you look inside it, it has a nectar guide, just like in our giant flower. That's right. If they flower at night, they must be pollinated by insects that come out at night, like lots of little moths or midges. We've got lots of plants that flower at night here at Iver Environment Centre, even though we don't ever have schools coming at night. The reason we do this is because if we can encourage things like moths into our centre, we'll also encourage bats, because the bats will come to eat the moths, and we want as many different types of animals here as possible. So that's it. I've got 4 challenges for you this week that you can choose from. Number 1 is, of course, dissecting your own flower. Maybe if you've got a garden, you can get one from there. Perhaps you can buy some flowers from the supermarket. See if you can find the different parts of the flower and stick them onto a piece of paper separately and label each bit. Even maybe use a paintbrush to get some pollen off and stick that down. The second challenge is to see if you can find a horse chestnut tree and look and see if you can see any yellow flowers still left on that. The third one is, I've given you so many things to think about this week, haven't I? The third one is to dress up as a bee, watch a video on waggle dances and do your very own waggle dance to tell a member of your family where they can find some flowers. By the way, when I was talking about the bees, I kept on calling the bees he. It's only the girls who go out and collect the nectar and do all the work. Only girls. So call them she, not he. And the final one is, for some of you might be interested in doing some research. So there's flowers that don't actually give their pollinators nectar at all. In fact, they trick their pollinators. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to do some research into orchids and find out how they trick the other insects that might not be so interested in nectar. So maybe things like parasites, okay? And how they trick them into becoming pollinators. See you next week.